The first thing I registered was the sound. The sharp, wet crack of a palm against skin, impossibly loud in the sudden silence of the reception hall. Then, a beat later, the pain. It bloomed across my cheek, hot and electric, and for a moment, the chandeliers above me swam in a blur of gold and white. For 2 whole seconds, I didn't understand what had happened. One moment I had been standing there in my ivory gown, my hand resting on my new husband's arm, trying to comprehend why my father was screaming at me in front of 200 people. The next, I was stumbling back, my shoulder hitting a massive floral arrangement of white roses and eucalyptus. The crystal vase wobbled, then crashed to the polished marble floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. A collective gasp went through the crowd like a wave. I heard my mother's strangled sob. From somewhere near the head table, my new sister-in-law let out a disbelieving little shriek. My father stood in front of me, his chest heaving, his face a shade of crimson I'd never seen on a human being before. His hand was still raised, fingers curled, as if he was deciding whether to do it again. The string quartet that had been playing a soft rendition of a pop song had stopped, their instruments hanging uselessly in their hands. "You are no daughter of mine," he rasped. His voice was so thick with rage it sounded like gravel being crushed. "You are a disgrace. A lying, scheming little." Beside me, Marcus, my husband of exactly 4 hours, finally snapped out of his shock. "Robert, what the hell is wrong with you?" He stepped between us, his hands coming up in a defensive posture. "You need to back away. Right now." But my father didn't even look at him. Robert Langley's eyes, usually so cold and calculating, were locked on mine. For the first time in my life, I saw something in them I couldn't name. It looked, for one fleeting second, almost like fear. "Tell them," he snarled, and a fleck of spit flew from his lips and landed on the bodice of my dress. "Tell them all what you did, Alara." My cheek throbbed. I could feel the heat of a bruise forming, the skin tightening. Around me, the audience of 200 friends, family members, and business associates of both the Langley and the Whitmore families stared at the wreckage of what was supposed to be a perfect day. Their faces swam in my vision, shock, morbid curiosity, a few with raised phones, already recording. This was the moment my life split in two. "I don't know what he's talking about," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus, I swear, I don't know what he's talking about." My father laughed, a single, harsh bark. "Bullshit. You know exactly what I'm talking about, you ungrateful brat. You think I wouldn't find out. You think your little plan would actually work." A ripple of whispers moved through the closest tables. My mother was crying openly now, clutching her napkin to her face with both hands. Derek, my father's business partner since before I was born, was watching with an expression of cold, detached interest, like he was observing a board meeting gone sour. And then, cutting through the chaos, a new voice spoke. It was calm, measured, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had seen everything. "Is there a problem here?" Every head turned toward the entrance of the grand ballroom. A man stood there, silhouetted against the golden light from the foyer. He was in his 60s, sharp-faced, wearing a beautifully tailored navy suit and carrying a worn leather briefcase. He moved across the room with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew that when he spoke, powerful people listened. My father's color drained from his face so quickly that it was like watching an actor change masks. His hand finally lowered to his side. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded. The man stopped a few feet from us. His eyes, pale blue and steady, moved from my father's face to mine. Then they rested on the shattered vase of flowers on the floor. "My name is William Calloway," he said, and his voice was calm enough to freeze the room. "Attorney at law, and I'm here to deliver something that should have been given to you a long, long time ago, Ms. Langley." From his briefcase, he withdrew a large manila envelope, thick with age, the corners soft and yellowed. "What is that?" My father's voice was suddenly a razor-thin whisper. "You shouldn't be here. This is a private event." Calloway raised an eyebrow. "Is it funny? I was invited." Before anyone could respond, he turned to me and held out the envelope. His expression changed, just slightly. Pity, warning. I couldn't tell. Alara, he said, and his address was warm, familiar, like he'd known me my whole life. Inside this envelope is the last will and testament of a man you never got the chance to know. A man who trusted you, even though he only got to love you from a distance. My heart slammed against my ribs. I don't understand. Your real father, he said, and the words fell like hammers. The man who raised you is not your real father. He never was. And I think he knows that. The room exploded into a storm of gasps and shouts. But I barely heard them. All I could see was the look on the face of the man I had called Daddy for 28 years. The man who had just slapped me in front of everyone I loved. The mask was finally gone. And what was underneath was pure, unadulterated terror. And that was the moment I knew. Everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. Welcome to Broken Trust Stories. If you've ever felt the ground shift beneath your feet, if you've ever had a single moment redefine everything you thought you knew about your family, then this is a story for you. Stay tuned, because this is a long one, and you're going to want to hear every last detail of how it unfolds. And if you want to make sure you never miss a story like this one, hit that subscribe button right now. It helps the channel more than you know, and it keeps the stories coming. The man I called my father was always a difficult man. I need to state that clearly, because for years I made excuses for him. Robert Langley was a self-made man, the founder of Langley Development Group, a real estate and construction empire that had built half the suburban office parks and strip malls in the greater Columbus, Ohio area. He was an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a full head of silver hair that made him look like a senator from one of those old political dramas. He commanded rooms. He negotiated contracts worth tens of millions of dollars with the same ease most people ordered a coffee. But at home, he was a different creature. Cold, distant. He had a way of making you feel like you were a guest in his house, an employee who was perpetually underperforming. He had no time for school plays or birthday parties. He had a vision for my life, and he never missed an opportunity to remind me that I was failing to live up to it. My mother, Caroline, was the opposite. Soft-spoken, kind, perpetually anxious. She spent my entire childhood trying to smooth the waters between her husband and her only child, apologizing for him, making excuses for his temper, his long absences, his cutting remarks. He loves you in his own way, she would say, wringing her hands. He just has a hard time showing it. I learned early not to expect affection. I was never beaten, but I was controlled. My grades were monitored. My friends were vetted. My future was mapped out by the time I was 12, business school, then a junior executive position in the family company, then a marriage to a suitable man from a suitable family, then grandchildren. A proper, orderly life. A Langley life. And for a long time, I tried to live it. I tried to be the perfect daughter. I went to Ohio State, got my degree in business administration, and took a job in the marketing department of Langley Development Group. I dated who I was told to date. I smiled at who I was told to smile at. I wore what I was told to wear. I became an excellent performer in the long-running play that was my life. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, I met Marcus Whitmore. He was an independent contractor, a guy who had built a small but respected residential construction company from the ground up. He was in the office to discuss a potential partnership on a new development, a mixed-use project on the north side of the city. He was the exact opposite of the men my father usually did business with. He listened more than he talked. He laughed easily. He wore work boots under his slacks and had a habit of running his hand through his dark hair when he was thinking. We started talking. He was smart, self-deprecating, and the first person I'd met in years who seemed genuinely interested in what I thought about things, not just what I could do for him. One conversation led to another. Coffee became lunch, lunch became dinner, and 6 months later, Marcus asked me to marry him in the middle of a half-finished house he was building, surrounded by sawdust and the smell of fresh lumber. It was, without a doubt, the happiest moment of my life. When I told my parents, my mother cried. My father just stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment, his face an unreadable mask. Whitmore, he said finally. The contractor. Yes, sir. He's not from our world, Alara. He works hard. He's built something real. He builds houses. We build empires. There's a difference. I love him, I said, and for once, the words came out without a tremor. And he loves me. We're getting married. For just a second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. A flash of something that wasn't quite anger, something darker, more complex. But it vanished before I could identify it, replaced by the familiar mask of cold disapproval. "We'll see," he said. And he walked out of the room. The weeks that followed were a war of attrition. My father opposed the marriage at every turn. He boycotted engagement parties. He refused to meet Marcus's family. He made cutting comments about Marcus's own family. A father who had died of cancer when Marcus was in his 20s, a mother who still lived on a farm in southern Ohio. He even threatened, at one point, to cut me off from the family trust fund if I went through with the wedding. "I don't care about the money," I told him, and I meant it. "I never asked for this life, Father. I just want to be happy." That was the first time I saw that flicker again, that same strange, fleeting expression. It was almost like he was searching my face for something, looking for proof of a lie. "Is that so?" he said, his voice low and rough. Happiness. What a noble, pointless little goal. But he didn't stop the wedding. He showed up to the rehearsal dinner, stiff and formal, and made a toast that was so backhanded it would have been funny if it hadn't been so sad. He didn't smile. He didn't dance with me. He just stood in the corner, drinking scotch and watching me with those cold, unreadable eyes. And now, looking back, I wonder if he was waiting for this very moment. If he knew, somehow, that the truth was already on its way to find me. The grand ballroom at the Franklin Estate Hotel was the picture of ruined elegance. The crash of the vase had silenced everyone, and they remained frozen as William Calloway continued to walk toward me, the envelope still extended. The scent of the overturned roses mixed with the crystal-clear stench of fear and shock in the air, a cloying, sweet-perfumed confusion. My voice, when I found it, was barely a whisper. "My real father. That doesn't make any sense. I know who my father is." "No, Alara," Calloway said, and his voice softened. "You know who raised you. There is an enormous difference." He pulled a crisp white business card from his breast pocket and slid it from the envelope, holding the card out at the same time. It was creamy white stock, heavy, with a single name embossed in understated serif, Theodore H. Merrick. No address, no phone number, just the name. I stared at it. The name was completely foreign to me. "Theodore Merrick," Calloway repeated. "He passed away 22 years ago, when you were 6 years old. His will has been in probate with a small, private trust in Delaware for most of that time. It was sealed under a court order. An order that expired, as of 90 days ago. It has taken me that long to find you, Ms. Langley. You've been quite well hidden." I felt Marcus take my hand. His fingers were warm, steady. "What does this have to do with Robert?" he asked. Calloway's gaze flicked to my father, then back to me. "That is a much longer conversation. But I think, perhaps, it's time we had it. The will is not just a simple bequest. It contains instructions and certain revelations. Revelations that certain parties have gone to great lengths to keep hidden." His eyes, sharp and knowing, shifted back to my father. "Is that why you struck your daughter, Mr. Langley? Did you perhaps think that if you made a big enough scene, she would be too humiliated to ask the right questions? Or perhaps you thought you could have her removed from the premises before Mr. Calloway arrived?" My father's face twitched. A muscle in his jaw pulsed hard. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice tight. "I don't know any Theodore Merrick. And this is a private, family wedding. You are trespassing." "Oh, no," Calloway said with a small, sad smile. "I'm only trespassing on your comfort, Mr. Langley. And as for not knowing Theodore Merrick," he reached into the envelope and withdrew a single, faded photograph. He held it out casually, like a card trick. It was a picture of a man in his late 40s, sun-bronzed and smiling, sitting on the deck of a wooden fishing boat. He had the same sharp, dark blonde hair as mine, the same jawline. But his eyes, the eyes in that photograph had crow's feet from a lifetime of laughter, and they looked at the camera with a soft, peaceful joy I had never seen in a single photograph of Robert Langley. I felt my chest tighten. There was a physical familiarity in that face, a mirror image quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Who is that?" I managed. Calloway smiled gently. "That is your father, Alara. Theodore H. Merrick. A shipwright from Camden, Maine. A craftsman. A sailor. A man with a great heart and a very, very large fortune that he left to you, and only you." The room, which had begun to murmur, fell completely silent. But I was no longer aware of the audience. I was looking at the photograph, and then at my father, at Robert, and then back at the photograph. I was looking at the face of the man who had just slapped me, and I was watching his expression shatter like the vase on the floor. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. The moments that followed were a blur of organized chaos. Marcus, his voice surprisingly firm and commanding, somehow got the event staff to clear the room. He promised the guests an explanation, but his primary concern was getting me away from my father's escalating rage. Robert was being physically restrained by Derek, his business partner, and two of the hotel's security guards. My mother was being led away in hysterics. "Take her to the bridal suite," Marcus instructed one of the bridesmaids, a blonde girl named Kala, who was pale and shaking. "I'll be up in a minute. Don't let anyone else in." But I couldn't let it go. I grabbed Calloway's arm as he started to follow us, pulling him along. "You're coming with me," I said. "I want to hear everything." Now, half an hour later, I was sitting on the edge of a white silk chaise lounge in a suite that had cost $1,800 for the night. My wedding dress, a fitted mermaid gown, felt like a costume, its delicate beading and lace shocking against the reality of the situation. Harry, my new husband, stood by the window, his tie loosened, his jaw set in a hard line. And William Calloway sat across from me, the manila envelope on his lap. "I'm ready," I said, though I wasn't. "Tell me everything." He studied me for a long moment. "How much do you know about your mother's life before she married Robert Langley?" I shook my head. "Very little. She never talked about it. She said she grew up in upstate New York, went to college in Boston, and then met my father at a business conference in Chicago. She always said it was love at first sight." Calloway gave a sad little smile. "A very tidy story. The truth is somewhat more complicated. Your mother, Caroline Vance, was a young woman from a very wealthy family in Greenwich, Connecticut. The Vances had made their fortune in shipping. They were old money, but they were also very private. They believed in keeping personal matters away from the public eye." "Shipping," I repeated. "I thought her family was, I don't know. I never even met her family." "She told me they were all dead." "They are," Calloway said. "Mostly, but not entirely." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "When she was 24, Caroline Vance met a man named Theodore Merrick. He was a boat builder. A brilliant craftsman with a small shipyard in Maine. He wasn't rich in the traditional sense, but he came from a lineage of wealth. The Merricks had been shipping magnates in the 1800s, and Theodore had inherited a substantial but dormant trust. It wasn't old money prestige, but it was significant. A fortune waiting for the right moment to be claimed. He let that sink in. They fell in love, deeply, but her parents, your grandparents, disapproved. They thought Theodore was below her station. A laborer. They insisted she marry someone more appropriate. Someone like a young, ambitious businessman they had already chosen for her. Robert Langley. I felt my blood run cold. Robert. He was a junior partner in a development firm at the time, but he had ambition. Your grandparents saw in him a more acceptable match. They arranged for the two of them to meet. Your mother refused, at first. She loved Theodore, but her parents were relentless. They threatened to cut her off, to ruin Theodore's business if she continued to see him. And she was young, and terrified, and she felt she had no choice. So she married Robert Langley. I leaned forward, my hands trembling. But I was born after they were married. Calloway held up a hand. You were. But that's where the story takes another turn. Around the same time your mother was being forced into her engagement, Theodore Merrick discovered he was dying. A rare form of cancer. He had limited time. He also had something else, a secret that could change everything. I could barely breathe. What secret? Harry asked. Calloway looked at him, then at me. Theodore had a brother. A twin, to be exact. And that brother had a claim to something much larger than the Merrick Trust. He paused, and I saw him choose his next words with the precision of a surgeon. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible. But it has been verified by the trustees in Delaware. The will is not just about money, Alara. It is about names. It is about an inheritance that was hidden from the world. For God's sake, just say it, I snapped. Calloway leaned back. Your father, Theodore, was the true heir to a massive estate that was mishandled decades ago by a corrupt board. The trustees had been searching for the rightful heir for years. They found Theodore. He listed your mother as the executor of his estate before he died. But Robert Langley, who knew about this from the beginning, made sure that never happened. My heart felt like it was going to stop. What are you saying? I whispered. Calloway's voice dropped to barely above a murmur. Robert Langley didn't just marry your mother. He stole the man's future. He hid Theodore's identity, and he's been hiding you, too. Because that will, the one Robert has been sitting on for 22 years, names you, Alara, as the sole beneficiary of a fortune worth, well over $300 million. The silence in the room was so deep I could hear the faint scratching of a bird on the ledge outside. 300 million, I repeated. The number felt unreal, like a concept from a different universe. Calloway nodded. That's the liquid value of the trust alone. There are other assets. The will also includes evidence, Alara. Evidence that Robert Langley has been illegally draining that trust's accounts for decades, using a network of shell companies to keep you from ever discovering it. Evidence that his entire empire, his company, his political connections in Ohio, his image as a self-made man, is built on money that was stolen from you. My mind reeled. The man who had raised me, who had controlled every aspect of my life, had been stealing from me for my entire existence. The company I had worked for, the house I grew up in, the wedding I had just had, all of it was built on a lie. And now the truth was sitting in a worn leather briefcase, waiting to be opened. The will, I heard myself say. Let me see the will. Calloway hesitated. Ms. Langley, there are details in this document that it will be difficult to hear. I said let me see it. He slid the envelope across the coffee table. I took it with shaking hands. It was heavier than I expected. The flap was sealed with a cracked red wax mark, imprinted with a symbol I didn't recognize, an anchor and a star. I broke the seal. Inside was a sheaf of papers, yellowed with age but still perfectly legible. On top was a typed letter, dated 22 years earlier, addressed to, my dearest Alara, on the day you finally learn the truth. The handwriting on the envelope was the same as the name on the business card, Theodore H. Merrick. I unfolded the letter. My eyes scanned the first line. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and Robert Langley has failed to keep his promise. My vision blurred. I had to blink several times before I could continue. I want you to know that I loved you, Alara, even before you were born. Your mother was the only person I ever loved, and she was taken from me by fear and family pressure. I always wanted to be a part of your life, but I was ill, and the knowledge of what Robert was doing made it impossible for me to get close. But I never stopped watching over you. I never stopped fighting to make sure that my legacy would reach you. Asterisk. I looked up at Calloway. He knew about me. He knew where I was. He did, the lawyer said quietly. He wrote you this letter every year. And every year, Robert Langley intercepted it. Here is the last one. It was kept with his will, in the event that the truth ever came out. It is addressed specifically to you, to be delivered upon the expiration of the confidentiality order Robert placed on the trust. Robert thought the order would last forever. It did not. The next pages were a blur of legal jargon, but the key points were clear. The will detailed the creation of a trust in my name, its accounts, and the instructions for the distribution of the assets. It also included copies of bank statements, wire transfer records, and letters from Robert Langley to the Delaware trustees, all with the same signature, the signature of the man I had just watched slap me in front of everyone I loved. The evidence was damning. It showed a systematic, decades-long scheme to embezzle funds, forge documents, and hide my true identity from the very institutions that were meant to protect me. And then I saw the last page. It was a single photograph, clipped to the back. A picture of Robert Langley, much younger, shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize. The back of the photo had a single line of handwriting, "The man who sold his soul for a lie." Asterisk. Who is the other man? I asked, my voice cracking. Calloway's face hardened. That is Vincent Barlow, the man who ordered the cover-up. I stared at the photograph. Marcus came and sat beside me, his hand on my back. I felt the warmth of his touch, the solid reality of his presence. Who is Vincent Barlow? He asked. Vincent Barlow is the reason your father-in-law has been so desperate to keep you away from this envelope, Calloway said. He's the head of a private equity firm that Robert has been secretly partnered with for 20 years. A firm that has been helping him hide the embezzlement. And he's the man who, up until 3 months ago, held the original copy of this will in his personal safe. He wanted to keep it hidden. But he couldn't. Not from the law. I looked at the photograph again, at the two men shaking hands, their faces smooth with lies. And I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just fear or shock anymore. It was something colder, something that had been dormant for 28 years. It was rage. What she said next made me question everything. Alara, my mother began, but she couldn't even finish the sentence. She was standing in the doorway of the bridal suite, her face pale and tear-streaked, escorted by one of the hotel's managers. She looked small and fragile in her mother of the bride gown. The woman who had spent my entire life lying to me. You knew, I whispered. All this time, you knew. She didn't deny it. She just stood there, her hands twisting in the lace of her gloves. I had no choice, she said, her voice cracking. He told me if I ever told you, he would hurt you. He would hurt us all. He said he would make sure we lost everything, that we would be on the street. So instead, you let him slap your daughter in front of 200 people. Marcus's voice was sharp, protective. My mother flinched. I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't know any of this was going to happen. I thought if we followed the plan, if we just kept quiet, it would all be okay. He said you would never find out. He said he would take care of it. I stood up. The dress felt like a cage. The plan, I repeated, my voice rising. The plan was to let me grow up thinking I was his daughter. Let me work in a company built on stolen money. Let me marry someone he approved of, while the truth was buried in a safe somewhere. She didn't answer. She just closed her eyes, and I saw her shoulders shake with silent sobs. I need to know, I said, stepping closer. Why did he slap me? Why today? If you were all going to keep hiding it, why did he lose control in front of everyone? My mother opened her eyes. There was a haunted look in them that I had never seen before. Because he found out about the letter, she said. The one from Theodore. He found out that a copy had been delivered to the house 3 days ago. He thought you had read it. He thought you knew. He was trying to discredit you, before you could accuse him. He thought if he publicly humiliated you, made you look unstable, no one would believe you if you came forward. The phone rang. I jumped, the sound slicing through the heavy silence of the room. It was a shrill, old-fashioned ring, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Calloway, who had been listening quietly, reached into his pocket. Miss Langley, he said, glancing at the screen. This is the hotel's front desk. It's a call for you. Who is it? I asked, the words barely a whisper. He didn't answer. He just handed me the phone. Hello, I said, my voice unsteady. Alara. The voice on the other end was deep, smooth, and laced with a chilling calm I recognized instantly. It was Derek, Robert's business partner. Don't hang up. Your father has something to say to you. There was a scuffle on the other end. A muffled protest. And then Robert's voice, strained and furious. Don't you dare listen to that lawyer, you stupid girl. That will is a fake. It's all a setup. You have no idea what you're doing. Robert, stop it, my mother cried from the doorway. But I wasn't listening to any of them. I was staring at the phone, the cold plastic in my hand. And then I heard it, the sound of a car engine starting somewhere behind Robert. The sound of a vehicle pulling away. Where is he? I demanded, my pulse pounding in my ears. Where are you? There was a long pause. And then Robert's voice, hard and final. We're on our way to the house. We're going to make this right. Whether you like it or not. The line went dead. The drive to the Langley estate took 40 minutes. It was the longest 40 minutes of my life. Marcus drove, his jaw tight, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Calloway sat in the backseat, tapping on his phone, making calls I didn't ask about. My mother sat in the front passenger seat, clutching the handle above the door like a woman bracing for a crash. There's something else you should know, Calloway said finally, his voice low. Barlow isn't just a random partner. He's the one who's been keeping the original will in his safe. He's the one who convinced your father that if the truth ever came out, he could make it all go away. He's the one who's been siphoning the trust funds into a series of shell companies in the Cayman Islands. He's the real enemy here, Alara. Not Robert. How do you know all this? Marcus asked, his eyes on the road. Calloway hesitated. Because the trustees hired me to find you 2 years ago. My firm has been investigating this case for the better part of a decade. We know more about Robert Langley's secrets than he knows himself. And we know exactly what he's planning to do tonight. He leaned forward. He's going to try and destroy the evidence. The original will, the letters, the photographs, the bank statements, all of it. He's going to burn it all down. And he's going to try to do it before the trustees can file the legal documents to freeze his assets. If he succeeds, there will be no way to prove the theft. The money will be gone. And you'll be left with nothing but a broken wedding and a family that's destroyed itself. I turned in my seat to face him. What are you saying? We need to get to the house before he does. Calloway shook his head slowly. We need to get there after he does. When he thinks he's won. When he's got all the evidence gathered in one place, ready to destroy it. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, black recording device. Because I have a copy of every single one of those documents. Scanned, verified, and stored in a cloud server that even Vincent Barlow can't touch. Your father is about to make the biggest mistake of his life. He's going to show his hand. And we're going to be there to capture it all. The Langley estate was a sprawling 6-bedroom colonial at the end of a private drive, nestled in the rolling hills outside Columbus. It had been my home for most of my life, but as we pulled up to the gates, it looked like a stranger's house. The windows were dark, but a single light burned in the study on the second floor. Robert's office. Marcus cut the engine and turned off the headlights. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the house. Are you ready? Calloway asked. I looked at the house. I thought about the little girl who had grown up in those rooms, always trying to please a man who never looked at her with love. I thought about the bride who had been slapped in front of everyone she knew. I thought about the 6-year-old who had never gotten to know her real father. No, I said, but I'm going in anyway. We moved quietly up the drive. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. Robert Langley was a man who believed he was untouchable. The foyer was empty, but I could hear voices coming from the study. Robert's voice, raised in anger. Derek's voice, calm and rational. And a third voice I didn't recognize, a deep, gravelly voice that sent a chill down my spine. That's Barlow, Calloway whispered, his breath warm against my ear. He's here. We crept up the stairs, staying close to the wall. The door to the study was ajar, and through the gap, I could see the scene unfolding inside. Robert was pacing back and forth in front of his desk, his face red, his tie loosened. Derek was standing by the window, looking out at the dark lawn. And a big man in a black suit and overcoat was sitting in the leather chair behind the desk, his fingers steepled under his chin. Vincent Barlow, I told you, this was never supposed to happen, Robert was saying. The will was supposed to stay sealed. The trust was supposed to stay hidden. You told me you had the original in your safe. You told me it would never see the light of day. Barlow's voice was cold as ice. And you told me the girl would never find out. And yet here we are, with a lawyer showing up at her wedding and handing her a copy of the most incriminating document in the history of your entire empire. So perhaps we should both stop pointing fingers and start figuring out how to fix this mess. I pushed the door open. It swung inward with a soft creak, and every head in the room turned. Robert's face went white. Alara, what are you doing here? I stepped into the room, Marcus and Calloway behind me. I was still wearing my wedding dress, though it was stained and rumpled, and the sight of it seemed to hit Robert like a physical blow. I came for the truth, I said. All of it. For a moment, no one moved. Then Barlow laughed. It was a low, ugly sound, like rocks grinding together in a rock tumbler. The blushing bride, he said, leaning back in the chair. How quaint. Did you come all the way here to shout at your daddy? Or did the lawyer convince you that you're some kind of millionaire heiress? I came to watch you burn, I said, and the words came out steady, despite the pounding in my chest. Barlow's eyes narrowed. Careful, girl, you're in over your head. Am I? I turned to Robert. You were going to burn it all, weren't you? The papers, the evidence, everything. You were going to destroy the only proof that you stole my inheritance, and then you were going to go back to pretending you're a self-made man. Robert stepped toward me, his hands raised. Alara, you don't understand. This is more complicated than you think. I understand perfectly, I said. I understand that you married my mother because her family made you. I understand that you've been stealing from a trust that was meant for me since before I was born. I understand that you've been lying to me for 28 years. And I understand that the only reason you're standing in this room right now is because you're terrified of what happens when the truth comes out. The color drained from his face. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I reached into my dress, a small, hidden pocket, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the letter from Theodore. I unfolded it, holding it up. I read the whole thing. Every word. He wrote to me every year. He sent me letters that you intercepted. He wrote about how you threatened him, how you told him that if he ever tried to contact me, you would make sure my mother lost custody. You destroyed him. You destroyed us. Robert's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Barlow stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is getting tedious, he said. Derek, get the documents. But Derek didn't move. He was staring at me, his face pale and unreadable. Robert, he said quietly. What did you do? Shut up, Barlow snapped. Just get the documents. I said, what did you do? Derek's voice was louder now, and there was a tremor in it. 20 years we've been partners. You told me this was all a misunderstanding. A legal technicality. And now I'm hearing that you've been hiding a stolen inheritance from your own daughter. That you're burning evidence in the middle of the night like some cheap criminal. It's not what you think, Robert said, his voice rising. I did it for her. For the family. I laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound. For the family. You slapped me in front of everyone I love. You called me a disgrace. You've been stealing from me since I was 6 years old. That's not family. That's evil. The room went quiet. The only sound was the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. And then Calloway spoke, his voice calm and final. I have copies of everything. The original will, the letters, the bank statements, the wire transfers, the shell companies. It's all been scanned, verified, and stored in a secure cloud server. I've already filed the paperwork to freeze Mr. Langley's assets, effective immediately. The Delaware trustees have been notified. The court date is set for next week. This is over, Robert. All of it. Barlow's face twisted into a mask of fury. You're bluffing. Calloway didn't flinch. Try me. For a long, tense moment, Barlow stared at him. Then, slowly, his gaze shifted to me. His eyes were dark and empty, like a shark's. You think this is a victory, little girl. You think that because you have some scraps of paper, you can bring down the men who built this town. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I held his gaze. I know exactly what I'm dealing with, I said. I'm dealing with a man who steals from little girls and hides behind a desk. And I'm done being afraid. What happened next happened fast. Barlow lunged for a briefcase sitting on the floor beside the desk. But before he could reach it, Marcus was there, blocking his path. He was bigger than Barlow, younger, and there was a look in his eyes I had never seen before, a cold, protective fury. Don't, Marcus said quietly. Just don't. Barlow hesitated. For a split second, I thought he was going to swing. But then he just smiled, a thin, mirthless smile, and stepped back. This isn't over, he said. Not by a long shot. He pushed past Marcus and walked out of the room. His footsteps echoed down the stairs, and then the front door slammed. A moment later, the roar of a car engine faded into the night. Robert stood frozen in the middle of the room, his chest heaving, his eyes darting from me to Calloway to the open door. He looked like a man watching his entire world crumble around him. He's gone, Derek said quietly. Now it's just us. Robert swallowed hard. Alara, don't, I said. Don't you dare say you're sorry. Don't you dare pretend this was for my own good. I stepped closer, and for the first time in my life, I looked at him without fear. You've been lying to me for 28 years. You stole my inheritance. You stole my father. And today, you hit me in front of everyone I know. I reached up and touched the faint bruise on my cheek. But here's the thing, Robert. I'm still here. I'm still standing. And I'm not going anywhere. I turned to Calloway. Do it. File the papers. Freeze the assets. Make sure every single cent of that money is returned to the trust. And make sure the world knows exactly what kind of man Robert Langley really is. Calloway nodded. It's already in motion. Robert let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. He stumbled back, his hand going to his chest. You can't do this. I'm your father. No, I said, and the word felt like a door slamming shut. You're not. Theodore Merrick was my father. You're just the man who did everything in his power to erase him. I turned and walked toward the door. But just as I reached it, Robert's voice stopped me. You think you've won, he rasped. You think the truth is so simple. There's a reason I did what I did. A reason you don't know about. A reason that will destroy everything you think you know. I stopped. I didn't turn around. I'm listening. He took a shaky breath. The trust wasn't just money. It was a legacy, a name, the Merrick name, and that name came with enemies, Alara. Enemies who would have killed to keep the inheritance hidden. Enemies who are still out there. That's why I kept you hidden. That's why I raised you as a Langley. To protect you from what Theodore really was. I turned slowly. And what was he, Robert? What was my real father? The clock on the mantelpiece struck midnight. The sound was heavy, final. And in the echo of the last chime, Robert spoke. He was the most dangerous man I ever knew. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like a storm about to break. And when I opened the envelope, I finally understood why he'd been lying. Because the papers inside weren't just a will. They weren't just bank statements and letters. They were the foundation of a life that had been built on secrets deeper than I could ever have imagined. It turned out Theodore Merrick wasn't just a shipwright. He wasn't just a kind-eyed man with a love for the sea. He was a whistleblower, a man who had spent his final years gathering evidence against a criminal enterprise that had infiltrated the very trust that was meant to protect me. An enterprise that Barlow and Robert had been in bed with for decades. An enterprise that had already killed once, and would kill again. And now, with the will unsealed and the evidence exposed, that same enterprise had their eyes on me. But here's the twist a liar like Robert could never understand. I had the truth. And I had a husband who loved me. And I had a lawyer who had spent years preparing for this exact moment. The will wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one. And this time, I was writing the ending. 4 days after my wedding, I walked into the Franklin County Courthouse in Columbus, Ohio, and watched Robert Langley's empire shatter. The hearing was supposed to be a routine asset freeze ruling, but Calloway had other plans. He did to Robert Langley what my father had done to me my entire life. He didn't stop at the minimum. He didn't play clean. He didn't leave a single stone unturned. The evidence was overwhelming. The original will, the forged signatures, the wire transfers to offshore accounts, the letters from Theodore that Robert had hidden in a locked safe in the basement of the Langley estate. The testimony of the Delaware trustees, who had spent 2 decades trying to find me. The testimony of Derek, Robert's own business partner, who had finally realized that he had been complicit in the destruction of a child's inheritance. And the testimony of my mother, who broke down on the stand and told the entire, ugly truth. She admitted to knowing about the theft. She admitted to helping hide me. But she also admitted that she had been abused, threatened, and controlled by Robert Langley for decades. That he had beaten her into silence. That he had threatened to kill her if she ever told me the truth. He said if I ever left him, he would make sure I never saw Alara again, she said, her voice cracking. He said he would tell everyone that I was insane, that I had fabricated the story, that I had stolen from his company. And I believed him. For 28 years, I believed him. The judge, a stern woman with gray hair and cold eyes, listened to it all without changing her expression. But when she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with disgust. Mr. Langley, she said, you have used your position as a father, a husband, and a businessman to systematically steal from and silence your own family. You have hidden a child's heritage for decades. You have committed fraud on a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend. And you have shown no remorse. She paused, her gaze moving from Robert to me. I have no choice but to rule in favor of the plaintiff. The assets in question, the Merrick Trust, the Langley Development Group accounts, and all related holdings, are frozen, effective immediately. All funds will be returned to the trust, and a full criminal investigation will be opened. Mr. Langley, you are to surrender your passport and remain in the state of Ohio pending further proceedings. Robert didn't react. He just sat there, staring at the table, his face gray and empty. For the first time in my life, he looked small. But I wasn't done. Your Honor, Calloway said, rising to his feet. There is one more matter to address. The plaintiff has a message for the defendant. For her father, if the court will allow it. The judge raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Go ahead, Ms. Merrick. I stood. My wedding ring caught the light, and I felt Marcus's hand steady on my back. I had never felt stronger in my life. Robert, I said, and my voice was clear, strong. You spent 28 years trying to erase the man who gave me life. You stole his letters. You stole his legacy. But you forgot something important. He looked up at me, and I saw the first flicker of fear in his eyes. You forgot that a name can't be erased. Not really. Not when the truth is out there, waiting to be found. Theodore Merrick loved me from a distance. And because of him, because of the trust he built, I now have the resources to make sure that your crimes are exposed to the entire world. I'm going to rebuild the Merrick legacy. I'm going to use this money to help people like my mother, who are trapped in silence. I'm going to make sure no one ever forgets what you did. I paused, letting the words sink in. And as for the name I choose to carry, it won't be Langley, it will be Merrick, because I finally know who I am. The courtroom was silent. Then the judge banged her gavel. Case dismissed. The months that followed were a whirlwind of legal battles, media attention, and rebuilding. Robert Langley was arrested 3 weeks later on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. His assets were seized. His company, Langley Development Group, was dissolved, its assets liquidated to repay the trust. Vincent Barlow, who had fled to Brazil, was apprehended by federal agents after a 6-week manhunt. His private equity firm was exposed as a front for a vast money laundering operation, and he now sits in a federal prison in Colorado, awaiting trial. My mother moved into a small house in a quiet neighborhood in Bexley, Ohio. She started therapy. She started painting again, something she had given up when she married Robert. She's still learning to live with herself, but she's getting there. We talk once a week, and slowly, tentatively, we're learning to be mother and daughter again. Derek, Robert's business partner, cooperated fully with the investigation. He got a reduced sentence, and he now works as a consultant for a nonprofit that helps victims of financial fraud. He wrote me a letter once, apologizing for his role in the cover-up. I haven't responded yet. Maybe someday. Marcus and I moved to a coastal town in Maine, Camden, the town where Theodore had built his shipyard. We bought a beautiful old house overlooking the harbor, and I started the process of rebuilding the Merrick family legacy. I founded a foundation in my father's name, dedicated to helping victims of financial abuse and exploitation. I also discovered that Theodore had kept a small, handwritten journal during his final years. It was full of hopes for me, dreams for my future, and a single line that I now keep framed on my desk: courage is the only inheritance that matters. Asterisk. It took a long time, but I finally understood. The money, the property, the name, none of it mattered as much as the truth. The truth that I had been loved, from a distance, by a man who had never given up on me. The truth that I was stronger than the lies I had been raised in. The truth that a broken trust can be rebuilt, if you have the courage to start again. My husband still looks at me the way he did on our wedding day, before the slap. "You're different now," he said one night, as we sat on the back porch of our house, watching the sunset over the Atlantic. "Different how?" I asked. He smiled, his hand finding mine. "You're free." And I was. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end of this story. If it made you feel something, if it made you angry, if it made you cheer, if it made you believe in second chances, then please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Broken Trust Stories. It truly helps this channel grow, and it lets me know that you want to hear more stories like this one. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in Alara's position? Do you think her mother deserved forgiveness? Would you have taken Robert's path, or would you have chosen truth from the start? And if you have a friend or family member who loves stories about family secrets, buried truths, and justice served cold, send this video to them. They'll thank you for it. Until next time, remember, some truths are buried for a reason. But the truth always, always, finds its way back to the surface. This is Broken Trust Stories. See you next time.